Today is the first day of DevToberfest. Very exciting SAP Cloud Application Programming Model and ABAP Day. We've had a great combination of sessions. If you're watching this live, be sure to go back and check all the replays from this morning's multiple sessions. They're all available on YouTube now. We'll also have the validation questions for today's lectures available by tomorrow morning. So if you want to get your points in the DevToberfest contest for attending these sessions, just be sure to check out the validation tutorial linked in the contest week 1 page on the DevToberfest home in the SAP community. You'll get all the information there, as well as what other tutorials that you can complete this week to earn points as well. But with that, let's turn over for today's topic for this session, data integration in ABAP Cloud with SQL services and CDS external entities. I know I can't wait to see what content we have here, so I'll turn it over to Arna and Harish. Thanks a lot for joining us for DevToberfest. Have a great session.
Yeah, so welcome everybody. So Harish and I will show you some details about data integration in ABAP Cloud with SQL services and CDS external entities. So let's first have a look at our agenda today. First, we will give an overview of data integration topics in ABAP Cloud. Later, then we will dig into some details of SQL services with 2 demos we have prepared. And after that, we jump to the CDS external entities, also with a demo, and then give some outlook, what will be future developments in our area. Okay, first start with data integration in ABAP Cloud. So we go back in time and have a look at a traditional ABAP system, like you might know it or should know it. So it consists of a set of application servers and a database. So like, for example, if you use SAP BTP ABAP environment, you usually start with like 2 application servers and your database is an SAP HANA Cloud database. So when we talk about data integration in ABAP Cloud, it's about SQL-based integration between systems. So we want to use SQL to access data in an ABAP system and from other systems. And we want to do that in 2 flavors. One is data federation and the other one is data replication. With data federation, we want to have live access from the ABAP system, for example, to another database, like an SAP HANA Cloud database. And with data replication, we want to get data from one system to the other, replicated, including only shipping the delta, the changes that were made to the objects. And that, of course, reliable, so we really get all the changes. Okay, on the other side, when we look at an ABAP system as our point of view, then we talk about 2 things. One is data exposure. So how can we define in our ABAP system what data is exposed from the system and should be accessible from the outside. And the second aspect is the consumption side. So how can we, from the ABAP system, consume data that is located somewhere else? Okay, let's first have a look at the data exposure. So we have some CDS views or tables or whatever is in our ABAP system, and we want to expose these views or these tables to the outside so that somebody else can read data from these objects via SQL. Yeah, actually we run into a lot of problems. So all the database objects in the database of the ABAP system, they are managed by the ABAP layer. So by the application servers, by the data dictionary and so on. So actually having or opening up a SQL connection directly to the database of the ABAP system is not really a good idea or good way to go, because we are actually accessing all the implementation stuff from the ABAP system. In addition, when we look at cloud systems, it's often not possible from a technical point of view to at all get access to the database. Okay, so does this mean we cannot use SQL for data exposure? Well, we can, because the solution are the SQL services. And with the SQL services, we have opened up a SQL port on the layer of the application servers. So an application now doesn't need to go to the database, but it can go to the application server and talk SQL to that application server. All the modeling, like which objects should be exposed and the stuff like which user can access these objects, that's all based on the ABAP Cloud service model with traditional service definitions and bindings. In addition, all this machinery, the SQL service, they are fully integrated with ABAP Lifecycle. So we take care of the implementation details, how something is modeled on the database. We hide that from you, and you can just query your CDS views. In addition, all the access management is based on ABAP users. So there is no need to define additional users on the database and manage them. So you just use ABAP users and use the traditional way of managing authorizations on the ABAP level, including business user data restrictions, like restricting data to, for example, certain regions or certain aspects of your data model. Yeah, in addition, as every request goes through the application server, all access in the end benefits from application server buffering, like the table buffers that we have in the application servers. We also provide a client component for the SQL services, which is the ODBC driver for ABAP, which is a standard ODBC driver, which can be used inside every application that supports ODBC drivers, like, for example, Microsoft Excel that we see later in the demo. In addition, we have, since some releases, the ODBC driver for ABAP being a default component in your SAP HANA Cloud database. So you can use your SAP HANA Cloud database to create a remote connection to the ABAP system and use standard SQL inside HANA to access your data. Okay, and that was how we can access data from our ABAP system from the outside, so the data exposure part. Now let's have a look at the data consumption. So we have our ABAP system and we want to access data that is located somewhere else, like in a database, which could also be SAP HANA Cloud database. Yeah, it could also be an ABAP system, because actually with the SQL services, the ABAP is now some kind of a database. And for this, we offer a new CDS modeling artifact, which is the CDS external entity. And actually, the CDS external entity provides now the possibility for outbound SQL access, so going to another database and accessing data, loading data from there, and combining that with your local data. And when we talk about external entities, we have actually two flavors how you can use them. The first one is what we call the dynamic access. This means you can use a CDS external entity inside your ABAP SQL code. Like in a program, you can say, I now want to have a query which access some external data from some other database and load that and process that. So this is what we currently have with the 2408 release, for example, of BTP ABAP environment. And what will come, or what is planned, is what we call the static access. This means you will be able to use CDS external entities as base objects for your CDS views. So you can build other CDS view entities and views on top of the external entity. And by that, you can integrate remote data into your normal view modeling. Yeah, as mentioned, we have a new CDS design time artifact, which is the CDS external entity, and that actually models the data structure of your remote object. So it's comparable to an SAP HANA virtual table, which maps your local view of a remote view or table. And as a remote could use different names for the object or for the fields. We also have a mechanism that you can say, okay, my ABAP name is like this, and the remote object name or the remote field name is looking different. And then we have a second artifact, which we call the logical external schema, and that is actually a representation of a remote system, which next is also, oh, sorry, which is also relevant for the configuration aspects. So you actually then take a logical external schema and map that to a specific remote system with all the configuration data, like what is the host name, the port, the user, and so on to use. Yeah, the technology we use or we have built that's based on the SAP HANA Smart Data Access. So the requests that the ABAP system sends are actually sent to the database of the ABAP system, and then from there they are sent to the remote system. And these CDS external entities, they are actually a more powerful replacement of the so-called secondary database connections, which are not available in ABAP Cloud. But now we have a very powerful version of that to access remote data. Okay, so let's have a deeper look into SQL services, and then we jump right into the demos. So as mentioned, we want to expose data from our ABAP system and make that consumables by some other system, like an SAP HANA Cloud database or some other application. And from the design time, we have to do some stuff. So we have to create our CDS view entities. So they actually are the views that we want to expose. And then we need to define a service definition where we just list up all the entities that we want to expose. And then instead of creating a service binding of like a OData type, we now have a new type which represents the SQL access. So you just take the service definition with all the CDS view entities listed, and then you say, okay, I want to expose that as a SQL typed service binding. And that is actually the magic to say that the SQL port opens on the ABAP and you can access it. Then, depending on how you want to expose it, you either need a communication scenario when you go for technical user access, or if you want to use business users and also have their business data restrictions applied, you will need to create an IAM app, business catalog, and corresponding objects. And then later at configuration time, so all the design time objects are active in your system, then you need to configure your concrete integration. And there you either use the communication system and arrangements for the communication scenario access, or you can create business roles and assignments to actually assign the privileges to your business users. And with that, I hand over to Harish for the demo.
Hello, I think you can hear me. So we will just
Yes.
go to the first demo, which is the SQL services. Before going directly to the SQL statement, let's just look at what happens in the ABAP system. So here we are in our backend. Oh, I think I shared it. Let's just try again. Screen. Okay, now we are finally in our ABAP backend system. Here we can see our small package where we have our artifacts. And now we have our CDS based data model. We have a data definition, which is on top of a database table. We can just execute it. There was some issue. Now it looks solved. So we have our CDS based data model on top of a database table. Now we execute it, run it, and then we can see the values. So these are the entries. Now, if we want to build a SQL service on top of this, so first we need a service definition, which was already explained, where we expose this CDS view entity or more or less our data source. Then we build a service binding on top of it, which is type SQL. So we have a SQL binding with the SQL schema name. Then we expose this or bind it to a communication scenario for communication with cloud system. So here we also have our COM scenario. We have a communication scenario here. I'm just showing this as an example. This is our communication scenario. And here we have the privileged in the inbound. And why is this? Because we need to enable privileged access. And for this, we have the authorizations. Here we can see the authorization object. And if we just scroll down, we can see the authorization fields. And here we have the SQL schema where we include the SQL schema of our SQL bindings to enable cloud-based communication in the communication scenario. Now we have our communication scenario with our SQL service, and now we go to our HANA, and here we have a SQL statement. And before going into that, let's just go through what we are doing here. First, we have established communication with our cloud system, backend ABAP system. Then we have created a remote source with ABAP ODBC adapter with username and password. Then we want to create for this a remote source, and we create a virtual table. And what is this virtual table? This is sort of a container to get data or retrieve the data from our backend system. And how do we identify our data in backend system? Here we have a remote source. Then we have, this is our SQL binding or the SQL schema, and the data source, which was our CDS entity. So from this, we get data of the backend system into our virtual table, which is our data container. Now we can execute the select statement. Let me now we have our data, which is in privileged mode, which means we can there are no access controls on top of it, no restrictions, and we can see all the data. Now I think I can hand over to Anne again.
Yeah, just to recap that. So we have the CDS entity, the CDS view entities in the ABAP system, and the service definition and the service binding, and the communication arrangement. And what we have here is the consumption part. So we have a HANA Cloud database where we just can create a remote source pointing to the ABAP system, creating a virtual table, and then we can query that CDS view that we have exposed from the ABAP. So as Harish mentioned, this is for a technical user scenario where we can use the privilege mode. So there are no data restrictions for technical users. So the technical user can see all of the data that is exposed. And yeah, there's the other way, like we want to expose data for business user, and we want that for that business user, the data restrictions are applied. So I assume one business user might only see data for Germany or for UK. So let's see how that works.
Okay, now we can go to the technical user part. Again, we just jump back to our Eclipse. Here we have our business user. And for this, we are on the top of the same database model. We are creating a IAM app. And here we are adding our service, which is our SQL service, same one as previously. And now we have our authorization object. And here we can see the restriction fields. So what we are doing, we are taking the same database table, which we have here, our data source, and trying to restrict the display or access to data based on the school location. So we have a restriction field based on the region, and we are trying to restrict the data we access from our backend system. For this, we have the field region. Now we have added this IAM app to our business catalog. Here we have the business catalog and the catalog ID, which is already published locally. Now we go to our POE Launchpad, sort of front end for our ABAP system. And here we can see the business user. This is my business user. And what are the roles and catalogs we have assigned. Here there is a business role, sports school, which is assigned for my business user. And here we can already see the assigned business catalog, which is from our backend system. And now we want to see which restrictions we have created in the backend system are already here. So we have the access categories. Here we can limit based on the value help, no access, restricted, etc. And we have our restriction type, Z region. And here we are trying to restrict the location based on the region, which is, let's say, DE, Germany. Now we can we can access this business data from an external application like Excel. Here I'm taking Excel. Now I want to get data from other sources. Here I have a ODBC, and just to show this is our ODBC, let's say UI or data source administrator. For the business user, we can just check what we have configured. Here, the authentication type is browser logon, and we have the host name and authentication, and here we have the service path, again our SQL binding. Now we can select this, say okay. Takes a few seconds. Yes. Now we have a business user data source, which is already configured. Now we can go to our data source. And here we can see we have only one entry based on our location. And here we can change the settings, we can do transformation on the query, etc. Transform data, etc. So this is how it works. We can also show this in a different manner. We can do queries, etc. And I will just show this, keep this window open for Arne to give a few more details. Maybe Arne, you can just give some details till this thing opens.
Yeah, actually, you can browse with this screen here. You can browse all the objects that are exposed from the ABAP system, and then you can formulate a custom query with the Excel tool here. And in the end, you can load the data into your Excel sheet and work on that data. So yeah. So as Harish is using his own user, he can only access all the data that is from the location Germany. Of course, some other user would have another business role, and he might be able to access or see data from other regions. Yeah, so let me jump back to the slides. Yeah, so what we just saw are the both scenarios. So getting data from the ABAP system into a HANA Cloud database, and Harish used the technical user setup with a communication system. And we also saw the access from Microsoft Excel, where the business access was done with data restrictions applied. Okay, this is all about getting data out of the ABAP system into your database or end user application. And now we go to the other part again, like how can we use CDX external entities to access remote data from within your ABAP application. And yeah, so as mentioned, we only have the dynamic access so far, and let's have a short look at a typical query. So I just want to select some fields from my view. This way, this would be a view local to my ABAP system. And when you remember what the secondary database connection provided, there was the option to add a connection fragment to the query. Like, please execute that query on what I have configured as a connection name, my remote. And then the whole query was sent to that remote system. Yeah, with the external entities, we actually changed that and we introduced a new syntax. So you now write something similar. You can say, select some fields from my view provided by my remote. And my remote, that is now a design time artifact, which is the logical external schema. But there's one slight difference. So this is actually not a clause which is part of the whole query. This is something that belongs to that single view. So I actually say I want to select from my view, and my view is located on that my remote system. And I can even join it with local data, or I can join multiple views which are located there. So it's an object level attribute and not a connection-wide setting, a statement-wide setting, sorry. Okay, so that's external entities is the way to access remote data from my ABAP system. And as mentioned earlier, the ABAP will send the query to the database of the ABAP system, and the HANA database will then do all the federation stuff that is needed to process that query. From the design time, we have different artifacts. So you can define CDS external entities. So in my query example, the my view was the CDS external entity. And you need to at least define one remote definition, which is based on a logical external schema, and that was the my remote name in my example. And then we need also to create some artifacts for the communication setup. We need to create an outbound service for the logical external schema, and we can take that outbound service and put that into a communication scenario, which we then can configure with the communication system and arrangements and the administration UI. And of course, on the design time, you also have your ABAP code, your ABAP program, where you have some ABAP SQL statement inside, and there you reference the CDS external entities that you have modeled. Okay, and as mentioned, at configuration time for that specific ABAP system, you need, of course, to configure that your logical external schema points to a concrete remote source. And it can be different per system, so it's something you have to configure at the system where you want to use the code that uses the external entity. Okay, and with that, we also jump to a demo for the external entities, and I hand over to Harish.
So we have our HANA as our, let's say, database container. We have our data here, and we want to consume it through external entities in our ABAP system. Now for this, we have our external entities. And how does it look like? It looks like this. External entity, ZGE Sports School, external name, and this name has to be similar, same as the table name in our virtual table name in our HANA data source. And we have the external names, and they should also be same as the names in our external data source. In our case, HANA data source or HANA virtual table. Now we have an external entity. Now we want a logical external schema, which is more or less like a pointer to the remote data source. And then we have, again, the same communication scenario to enable communication with our remote system. And here, the additional artifact we have is our outbound service, because now we need an outbound service to access the data in our remote system. And here we provide the logical external schema, or in other words, we bind our logical external schema pointer to our outbound service to say where it has to get the data, retrieve the data to say. Now we can go to our class. We have prepared a small ABAP class. Here, this is our syntax, which was already shown. We want to select all data from our external entity provided by. So we get the data from our remote source, and this remote source has is bounded to the outbound service, which points, let's say, to our remote data source. In this case, our HANA virtual table. Now we can execute this. And here we see all the data. This is how it works. We are basically getting or retrieving data from our remote data source into our ABAP backend system. Let's say it is the other way around. Then Arne, maybe you could add a few more details.
Yeah, sure. Right, so what we see here is the SQL code with the query that uses the logical external schema, right? And what Harish didn't show, because it's more like a lot of configuration stuff, is the communication arrangement. But yeah, right, you could just show it. So in the communication arrangement for the outbound communication, you need to configure in the lower section the remote database schema, where the objects are located in your remote system, in your remote database. So you know that only at configuration time and not at design time. Of course, it also could be different depending on your remote system. And a communication arrangement always needs a communication system, which actually represents the whole remote system as an entity in the communication management. And there, when you scroll down, Harish, there is a section where you enable the remote SQL access. And there you, for example, say, what is the HANA Smart Data Access adapter that I want to use? And as Harish is accessing from the ABAP system to a remote HANA database, he is using the HANA ODBC driver. And he also has to do the adapter configuration, which is actually what you would also do when you create a remote source in an SAP HANA database. So you need to specify host port settings and stuff, and the driver and additional settings depending on the remote source. And with that, like activating the communication system and creating the communication arrangement, then everything is set and you can run the SQL code, and it will actually the ABAP SQL layer, it will take this query statement, it will look up what is the external entity named and what is the logical external schema, and then it will automatically create a HANA remote source in its own database and create the virtual table that is needed to allow HANA to access that remote data. So you could also say like the CDS external entities are some smart way of automatically managing HANA remote sources and HANA virtual tables through ABAP design time objects. Okay, with that, let me go back to the slides. Okay, yeah, so we saw that demo here. So Harish had some tables in his HANA database, and he was able to access these tables from his ABAP system via the CDS external entities. Okay, so we are near the end, and we'd like to close with some outlook, what is coming, and also with some documentation links. So let's first have a look at the SQL services, so the way to expose data from your ABAP system. And yeah, there are a lot of topics on the table. So what we plan to do is that you also can expose ABAP-managed database procedures, so that you can, if you have a client that supports calling database procedures, you could actually write some AMDPs in your ABAP system and being able to call these from the outside. In addition, currently the SQL servers are limited to read-only access, and what we are planning is to introduce data manipulation statements like insert, update, delete, so that you actually can write data to dedicated tables or views in the ABAP system. Of course, you should not use that to write into transactional data, but it's more like bringing data into the system, like into staging tables that can be processed later with ABAP code. And we are also planning the replication features so that you can call out to your SQL service and replicate data with Delta support. Yeah, looking at CDS external entities, actually the planned feature set is actually very similar. So the first big thing is really that we want to make CDS view entity, CDS external entities being part of your view stack. So you can then build CDS views on top and actually hide all the details of that remote access. But you should still be somehow be aware that you have remote access. So it's not like you should load millions of records and assume that that is lightning fast, right? Yeah, then we also want to support write. So like writing data from your ABAP system via SQL to some remote database. And we also want to have external entities with data replication support. So like using SAP HANA data replication machinery, and also something like working with the SQL services of the ABAP. Yeah, of course, you could also use CDS external entities to call back to some SQL services. Could be even the same system, although that doesn't make sense, but technically it would work like a loopback call. Okay, so some further reading. We have added some links to the documentation for SQL services and some blocks where you have step-by-step instructions to build up an example. And the second part of the documentation or the links is about CDS external entities and also a blog post describing that feature. There's also documentation in the SAP HANA Cloud documentation where they describe how to create ABAP remote sources and so on. Yeah, and with that, Harish and I like to thank you, and we still have some time for questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. A very, very interesting presentation. I was actually chatting with my colleague Rich Alman. We were talking about some of the things we saw there that we were excited about. And there are a couple of questions in the chat. I'll relay those to you here. We got one that may have been answered by colleague Jorg, but I'll go ahead and read it out and then see if there's anything you want to add to it. So we have a question for Daniel. It says, exposing of data is restricted to release CDS views, right? So I'm not able to expose not released objects database tables, correct?
Yes, sure. So you cannot access any kind of database table that is in the system. So you need to have either a SAP released object, or you build your own CDS view entity on top of a released object. So it's not like just you open the port and you can access all the data. So it's really following the ABAP Cloud rules. Yeah. And you can only use CDS view entities, not CDS views. So that's another restriction. Yeah.
Okay. And I think Jorg, when he answered very much along those lines. He added, though, that the view does need to be exposed via service definition. The service definition can be a customer object.
Yes.
And because of that, that does not have to necessarily be under a contract release.
Yeah, so if it's
which goes well with
object.
Yeah, which goes well with the session we had this morning on setting contract levels. Sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, if you just have your own objects, you don't need the contracts. But of course, when you look at SAP objects, you cannot just go down to expose any table that is there. Yeah.
Yeah. We did have a session earlier this morning on contracts and how to set your own contracts and release them and things like that. So that's very timely.
Yeah, that should all apply to SQL services and the same, because they are really using just the service model that we have in RAP overall, and everything applies. So it's just the small change, not using OData, but using the SQL binding. So, and then you have a SQL service.
The second question might be somewhat along those lines. A very intriguing question, again, from Daniel. Would it be possible to expose data from a CAP service as SQL service with the goal of being able to consume that data with external entities in the ABAP system?
Oh, to expose from a CAP application a SQL service.
Yes.
Oh, I think therefore we are the wrong guys, right? So you would need to have a CAP application.
Well, and Javier chimed in. He said another viewer here was curious how that might work, thinking, well, would you just take the HDI container and the table and treat that as your external entity, and then you could expose that from the ABAP level you could implement a service on top of that that read the external entity and re-expose that at the ABAP level.
Yeah, that could be. So you could, like, in your CAP application, you could define some of your views as like API views, which you somehow keep stable, and then you could create a database user somehow to have access only to these views. So not to your implementation views on tables, but to some API views. And then you could just use what Harish has shown, like model the corresponding CDS external entity in your ABAP and access that with a standard HANA connection. Yeah. But that is really then going to the database of your CAP application, right?
Yes.
So you need to be careful.
Yeah.
But in principle, if you really go for a schema with API objects, that could be a solution. Yeah.
Yeah. Because CAP does not have the equivalent of RAP to have both a SQL service exposure and an OData. On the CAP side, we have OData, we have REST, we have GraphQL, but we don't have that SQL exposure that you have in RAP. Yeah. Another question just came in from Emerson. He'd like to know if the following scenario would be considered a good practice. Having an app on BTP that uses the HANA database and having a baddie in the S/4HANA public cloud utilizing a CDS external entity to access that.
Oh, I'm not sure if a body is then the right way to do that, but of course you could in your S/4HANA public cloud application. You also have developer extensibility with all the ABAP Cloud features, and you could build a CDS external entity that goes in principle to your ABAP system or to some HANA database object. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe setting aside the part of it, and we have some separate sessions on the proper way to do extensibility in S/4HANA Public Cloud. But maybe the underlying question here is this functionality for external entities available in S/4HANA Public Cloud?
So yeah, I'm not the expert there with the release code line strategy stuff, but in principle, ABAP Cloud stuff is available in S/4HANA Public Cloud. As we rely on the SAP HANA Smart Data Access and the corresponding ODBC drivers. So there can be differences like which set of database drivers is available in the corresponding products.
Yes.
So it could be limited in what is in S/4HANA.
Okay. Well, that's currently all the questions we have in the chat. There's some thank yous for excellent session, very enjoyable. And I think with that rounds out our first day of DevToberfest. Come back each day this week for a different topic. Tomorrow's topic will be Tooling Tuesdays, where we'll look at the latest capabilities of SAP Build Code, SAP Build Apps, and SAP Build Process Automation. So come back tomorrow. I'm sure there's many capabilities there. Some new ones coming to the ABAP world as well, if you're an ABAP developer, and we'll begin to see some of that evolve here as we go too. So thanks a lot for joining us for today's kickoff day of DevToberfest, and we hope to see you back all throughout the following 5 weeks. So thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the stream has ended.
Okay.
We had 240 people